Yes, here we go. Okay, we're going to give it a go, see what happens. What we did yesterday is we had a look at the background to, what was it? We started with the 17th century. We started to talk about some of the themes and the ideas that are going to be influential. And, of course, we had a look at Catholicism, we had a look at Catholic theology. A lot of what we've been doing when we study the 17th century, when we study the course 1629 to 67, is going to be based around religion. Religion is an all-pervasive element of life in this period. And what we found over the last couple of years is that getting to grips with the influence of religion, getting to understand how significant it is one of the biggest challenges to developing a true understanding of the course as a whole. So what I want to do today is, having established what is Catholicism, what was the Catholic theology, to bring it now a little bit into, well, what happens with this idea of a Reformation. We've seen this talked about yesterday. Yeah, you all know from Henry VIII, the break with Rome, and all these things. You know that there is a religious spirit. We mentioned yesterday about how it has repercussions to the current day in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, Scottish football, Glasgow Rangers, Glasgow Celtic, the entire rivalry between those two sets of fantasies. It's football, but also it's religious culture. So, what we do is we have a look at the background to the Lutheran Reformation over the course of this lesson, which is going to involve giving you a range of bits of information. First of all, a bit of geography involved. I've got some maps here that I'm going to give you. I splashed out, we won't colour. Yeah. So, this map gives you an understanding of the geography. What I will do is something over the course of the... Where we want to begin is with the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, the first aspect geographically of early modern Europe that you need to be aware of and get your head around. A lot, if you look at this map, you can see a lot of the nation states that we have today in Europe are present here. We've got England, we've got France, we've got Spain, we've got Portugal. But then other nation states, when we think about the map of Europe today, are missing. There's no Germany here, there's no Italy here. These countries, Germany, Italy, are a 19th century constructs. They're creations of the 19th century of nationalism. Germany itself did not become a unified country, Germany, until 1870. So what we have in the period we're looking at here is a mixture on the western side of Europe of established nation-state kingdoms that have, in the case of Spain, a relatively young history. Spain only became a nation-state at the beginning of the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century with the unification of Castile and Aragon into a single united kingdom of Spain. But England had a history as a kingdom going back, obviously, to, well, certainly 1066, or could argue even before that. France, likewise, right into the 800s, the Kingdom of France. But the German-speaking lands formed part, along with lands going down through the Alps to the, sort of the northern borders of the Italian-speaking lands, an entity that was known as the Holy Roman Empire. Now, in the 18th century, a wag called Voltaire pointed out that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And these things are sort of true still at this point. The Holy Roman Empire is a very strange construct. It has an emperor, but it's an emperor that's an elected emperor. And it's an emperor who doesn't really have control over the territories in the way one would expect an emperor to do. The emperor is best thought in terms of the Holy Roman Empire as almost the first among equals. He's someone who is able to exercise his will, govern the empire, only through close cooperation with those who had elected him, those who had chosen him. 7 electors, see them listed up there for what it's worth. 3 church-based electors, the archbishops of Mainz, Trier, and Cologne, and then 4 secular or lay electors, the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, should be a common there, I don't know what it is, the Duke of Saxony and the Margrave of Brandenburg. So the Holy Roman Empire, this territory in the centre of Europe, is a strange sort of amalgamation. It's something that we're going to see. The map, for what it's worth, that you've got here is a map that's roughly speaking in about 1618. That's an interesting date, a date that we'll talk about and we'll see the significance of subsequently. But it's a map that reflects the fact that at this time here, 1618, there's a split. The bluish lands that are called the Holy Roman Empire there were Catholic, but the lands within the Holy Roman Empire that were yellow, they were still part of the empire, but they were known, or increasingly known from this period on, as the German states, for reasons that hopefully will become slightly clearer. So, what have we got? I've got some pictures for you as we go, so you can sort of see and get to know sort of key faces of the time. This fellow here is really significant. He is Albrecht of Brandenburg. He's one of our most significant figures in this period. Albrecht of Brandenburg, the Brandenburg family were one of the Holy Roman Empire's big power players. They were hugely wealthy, hugely significant. Albrecht of Brandenburg, his father was the Margrave, he was the elector. And when he died in 1499, his eldest son, Joachim, became the elector. But Albrecht, the next son, was ambitious. He was a power-hungry and very, very intelligent man. And he decided that if he wanted to exercise power, the most effective way to do that within the German ones was through a career in the church. He joined the church, rose rapidly through the ranks due to his dynastic position and the wealth of the family. This was a period in which basically money very much increased the way to power, to the extent that he was appointed Archbishop of Magdeburg, a very important archbishopric in Germany, at the age of just 23.
So is there a T on the end of the stuff on the
Who? Albrecht. There should be, sorry, I beg your pardon, should be Albrecht. Yeah, it's German for Albert. Albrecht. Yeah, beg your pardon, should be a T on the end. Never mind. Okay. I shared this with you, by the way, the presentation can be shared on Google Drive, so don't necessarily try and write down every last word. Get a sense of it, kind of soak it up, and if you want to try and make some notes, do so, but you can supplement Google Drive. Okay, 1514, the Archbishopric of Mainz became vacant. Now, the Archbishopric of Mainz was sort of the German equivalent of something like the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was the most powerful, the most prestigious of the German archbishoprics, the most influential. And of course, it gave access to an elector vote. The Archbishop of Mainz was one of the 7 electors. So Albrecht wanted this, he wanted it badly. And he decided that the way to do this, the only way he was going to be able to do this, was basically to treat it as an investment. To go to a wealthy banking house, the Fuggers, and to say, right, I want to borrow some money, I need to basically buy my way to the Archbishopric of Mainz. Will you lend me money? Bearing in mind that once I get the position, I'm aged only 23, I'm going to be in it for a long time, I'll be able to make sure that the vast wealth that comes to me as Archbishop of Mainz through the collection of taxes in my see, I divert back to pay my interest. And the Fuggers think that this is a good investment, and they lend him an awful lot of money. It also brings me to a bit of a literature, a favourite little quotation, favourite little passage of mine from my favourite series of books, Patrick O'Brien. Some of you might have seen yonks ago, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, a film with Paul Bettany and with Russell Crowe. That was basically sort of an amalgamation of a whole range of aspects and stories from Patrick O'Brien series of books. One of my favourite little sort of passages there where O'Brien makes a good comic use of the danger of mispronouncing fugger. Tell me, sir, do you know any bank who really understands this business? Some modern fugger? Oh, Stephen, please, hi, Jack. I refer to the fuggers, Mr. Orway, said Stephen, and didn't call me the fuggers, I repeat. I did love these books. They're absolutely awesome. There's 20 of them as well. If you ever get the chance, do read them. They're brilliant literature. It's like Jane Austen at sea. Absolutely fantastic writing. Really, really good stuff. Anyway, that was diversion aside. Albrecht of Mainz, as he's now called, because he's brought his way to the Archbishopric of Mainz, he needs to repay this money to the thuggers. So he strikes a deal with the Pope. The Pope this time is an Italian called, well, his first name actually was Giovanni, but he took the papal name of Leo X. And Leo X had done a similar sort of thing to Albrecht. They were men that understood each other. Leo X was someone that basically fought his way to the papacy. And Leo X was an ambitious man as well. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, he felt was not a fitting site for the Pope. He wanted it to be rebuilt. He hired some architects, including Michelangelo, to basically redesign the place. And this was going to cost an awful lot. So Leo X decided to launch a new indulgence drive. He decided to sell a new indulgence from the Treasury of Grace, the Treasury of Merit that the Church had. But this was a different one. This was new, this was unique. For the first time ever, Leo X was allowing an indulgence to be sold that not only basically acted as a get-out-of-jail card for you at the time of your death, but also could be used sort of retroactively to buy your way out of purgatory for dead relatives. So he basically opens up a vastly wider market, as opposed to basically having a situation where you can only buy an indulgence for yourself. Now, you can buy an indulgence for unlimited any dead relatives. So suddenly, in terms of marketing terms, in terms of market access, economists, business studies students who are thinking, wow, this has suddenly taken this market from being a finite, limited market, basically one sale to one person, I'll open it exponentially to every single dead relative that you have. And it's an absolute money spinner. If any of you do go to Rome, go and visit St. Peter's in the Vatican City, that was built on the proceeds of this indulgence. That funded the building of St. Peter's that we have today. But the indulgence hadn't been sold in the German-speaking lands north of the Alps. In fact, over the 1500s, there'd been a real sense of frustration amongst Catholics north of the Alps. The papacy, which, as you can see from your map, was all at once a religious office, but also a sort of a powerful office in its own secular right. The Pope was not only head of the Catholic Church, but he was also the supreme head of the papal state. So the Pope today is the head of state of the Vatican City. The Vatican City is considered a country, it issues its own passports, it has its own stamps, and the Pope is the head of state. In this period, you can see the papal states stretching all across the Italian peninsula up to Bologna, basically up to the borders of the Republic of Venice. So the Pope was a really powerful player in this period. And there's a strong sense north of the Alps, in the German-speaking lands, that the papacy was an Italian affair, and it was to do with Italians, and really, German speakers didn't much appreciate interference in their affairs, and they rather disliked the fact that quite a lot of money from German-speaking lands was getting diverted down to Rome, really seemingly to no benefit to the actual German speakers themselves. So Albrecht strikes a deal with them. He says, in return for me, for the first time, selling this new indulgence in German-speaking lands, a massive new market, I get a 50% cut. I get to pay off my debts to the thuggers. You get even more money to rebuild St. Peter's. Everyone's a winner. Everyone's a winner. And the Pope signs up and agrees to this. Now, apologies for that, there's quite a lot of words there. Don't try and write it all down. It's going to be something that you can browse through and have a look in more detail. But this is where Luther comes onto the scene a little bit. It's with the sale of this indulgence. Now, the indulgence controversy makes Luther. Without the indulgence controversy, Luther would have lived and died the life of a monk and academic in a pretty sleepy backwater town in eastern Germany, Saxony, without any real note whatsoever is the probable reality. Because he had become a doctor of theology in 1512, he was basically become a university lecturer, and his chosen specialism was on certain aspects of the Bible that he read and studied in the original Hebrew, the original Greek. He developed ideas that suddenly weren't heretical and weren't exclusive to him. People like Zwingli in Switzerland were saying the same thing at the same time. They just, it was a Twitter in this, they didn't know about it. They were away from each other. he was coming to the conclusion that really the Bible suggests that God offers his forgiveness free. You just have to want it, to pray to God, to believe in him. He didn't like the idea linked into things like penance and like that. Somehow God demands his pound of flesh. God demands punishment. God demands that you do something. His forgiveness. And Luther, even before the indulgences controversy breaks, starts to develop what he's beginning to call the doctrine of justification by faith alone. Sola fide. Sola in Latin is alone. Sola fide. Fidel in Spanish, faith. Sola fide. So this contrasts to what we've seen the other day when we looked at the Catholic doctrine of salvation through works, through actions, through these sacraments, these things you have to do to get God's forgiveness. Luther's beginning to think, you don't have to do anything. You've just got to genuinely believe. And if you genuinely believe and offer yourself to God, God offers his forgiveness for you. That's the deal. But it was the indulgences controversy that really got Luther going. Because Albrecht of Mainz hired the sharkiest, slickest salesman he could find. This guy called Johann Tetzel, who basically treated this in the least religious terms possible. He was a salesman. He was actually a friar as well. He was a Dominican monk. But first and foremost, he was a salesman. He rocked up in town with a bunch of people with big banners that were unfurled, set up in the town square, had a sort of team of monks acting as scribes to write out the indulgence, and he'd be there on stage. You'd almost like imagine him with sort of, sort of headset and sort of microphone, like, it was just like that. You sir, you look like you've got a dead father, come over here. This sort of stuff. He even had a little jingle. I don't know it's in German off the top of my head, but the translation to English sort of rhymes. And it went along the lines, this is sort of a literalish translation. When a coin in the pot doth clink, another soul to heaven doth spring. He kind of had this little kind of lyric that he sang, and there was a band playing, and it was sort of festival sort of atmosphere, and people would flock in. And he'd say, come on, I know you're poor, but you can afford, a couple of ducats, you can afford a couple of florins, come on. And basically, he just rocked up in the town, pitched up in the town square for a couple of days, and waited until he pretty much fleeced everyone in the town and the villages around before rolling on to the next town. Sermons were preached, the church on a Sunday, go out and buy your indulgence, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, And it was a massive money spent. It was a huge, huge financial money spent. And all the way through 1516 into 1517, Luther and others were disgruntled at this. There was a range of reasons why people were disgruntled. A lot of people, particularly the leaders of different areas of Germany, the princes, were disgruntled because they felt that this was an absolute Swiss. They felt this was taking money out of their lands, from a selfish point of view, money that they'd like to collect in tax respectively, or money that could be spent in markets that they get a cut out of. Money that was basically just going straight out as they saw it. Right, they didn't know about the secret deal with the Fuggers and Albrecht sort of basically paying off his debts. They thought it was just going all straight basically down to Rome. And also it religiously upset some people as well. You've got religiously the fact that people like Luther start thinking, where's the justification for this? Religiously, biblically, how can this be defended? And Luther gets so cross about this, he decides to take action. He writes out a blow-by-blow, 95 bullet points as to why he thinks that there is no defence of this indulgence. And he focuses on this particular indulgence that has been sold on behalf of the over 10 by Johann Tetzel. And in the style of what happened in those days, he wrote it all out, and then went and nailed it to the door of Wittenberg Cathedral in October 1517. And he also, for good measure, wrote another copy which he sent by sort of putting to post in those days by delivery courier to Archbishop Albrecht of Mainz. So he sends out his sort of list of details. The vital thing to realise at this point is that in doing so, he's not seeking to challenge the church. He's not thinking, hey, I'm going to be a reformer, there's going to be Lutherans soon. As he sees it, this is the beginnings of the scholarly debate. He thinks that mistakes have been made, genuine errors that can be corrected. He's not looking to sort of turn himself into some kind of great hero or stander up against the tyrannical regime of Rome or anything like that. He just wants to get a little bit of a debate going as to, well, maybe I'm mistaken, but can we just have a debate about where biblical justification is? His letter to Albrecht was framed in absolutely humble terms, sort of bowing despite the fact that Albrecht was younger than me. He said, your superior learning and wisdom, perhaps you can help show me the error of my ways, because I can't see justification for this. The printing press is a vital element of why this all takes off. This is a brand new technology. The printing press has only been around, a decade or so in terms of German towns and cities. And Luther's 95 Theses are Germany's first runaway bestseller. Completely contrary to anything Luther expected. They're read, they're printed, they're reprinted, and soon they're being read all around Germany. And they're tapping into this latent discontent with the way in which the Church in Rome is treating Germany. They become sort of the unexpected runaway bestseller of the year. No one saw it coming. And Luther then finds himself in a funny position, because now, as opposed to just being a monk who hoped by maybe individual private correspondence, maybe sort of scholarly debate with a few other academics who have had a sort of chat about this, suddenly finds himself at the centre of the Twitter storm. Suddenly everyone's talking about him and his 95 Theses and what he represents, and wow, what does that mean? He suddenly is sort of racked by uncertainty as to what does this all mean? Now, people who spoke out against the church, and people who are perceived to speak out against the church, trod a dangerous line. And the church had ways and means of shutting people up. But right from the word go, Luther got lucky. Luther found himself to be protected by people who, for a range of reasons, very often political, felt it was in their best interests to shield him from too much attention. Firstly, his Augustinian superiors in the monastery that he was part of in Wittenberg, they said, we're going to see how this runs. They could, at the first sort of way in which it blew up into a massive cause célèbre in Germany, they could have basically said, well, he's damaged goods, he's nothing to do with us, we don't want the attention, we don't want this, he does not speak for the Augustinians, and they could have booted him out of the order, and that would have basically isolated him and made it easily sort of dealt with. But they didn't. And secondly, and even more significant, at this stage it's only the tacit support, tacit Joachim about people unspoken, but through his actions, or his refusal to speak out against Luther, his tacit support, his silent support is there. The support of Elector Frederick of Saxony. Frederick of Saxony is interested to see how this plays out for political reasons, as well as for theological reasons. Frederick of Saxony wonders, could Luther be right here? I don't want to go to hell. This guy's right. I want to sort of hedge my bets here. So you get this lull, this period where in the very first sort of weeks and months of it being live and active, October 1517 through to spring 1518, it's not nipped in the bud by the church. Luther isn't isolated and dealt with, as other people previously had been. They've got to do something. They've got to do something. So the church decides to put together, unable to grab him from his Augustinian monastery, or unable to basically kidnap him under the nose of Frederick of Saxony, they try a range of different tactics on this. The first of these, and these a couple, they decide to try to get Luther to recant, to back down and to admit that he is wrong. As it transpires, Luther is monumentally pig-headed. And refuses at any given point to basically ever back down about anything. So it transpires this is not a good plan. But they felt that they could argue him down, a bit of sort of brow beating by authority figures is the crucial thing they decided to do. So this chap called Cardinal Cajetan, Thomas Cajetan, the Pope's basically ambassador to Germany, is told, meet with Luther, talk him down, make him apologise, make him say sorry, and let's draw a line under it, please. Cajetan and Luther meet in a town called Augsburg in October 1518. So it's basically a year after the 95 Theses has been posted. And Cajetan basically says, hey, you do realise that what you're saying is challenging the authority of the Pope, challenging the authority of the Father of the Church. Luther, however, says, I don't see it that way. Don't see it like that. He says, I'm not challenging the authority of the Pope. I'm just asking, has an honest mistake been made? Can we have a discussion about it? And Cajetan writes back saying, this man is going to be difficult. He's not going to back down on this. And he's asking for biblical proof for indulgences. Now, the Catholic Church's hierarchy knows there is absolutely squat in the Bible that says about the legitimacy of indulgences. There just isn't anything there. There's an awful lot of Catholic theology that has no biblical legitimacy whatsoever. An awful lot of Catholicism is not in the Bible. So this puts me in an awkward position. Luther's saying, I respect the authority of the Bible. Of course I do. Of course I respect the authority of the Bible as the acknowledged word of God. And, you know, I don't see in the Bible, the word of God, anything about indulgences here. Awkward. 1519. Things now become even more awkward for the Catholic Church because of politics. Politics is the word politics. The Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian I, there he is, it's sort of slightly dull picture on the lights too bright for him. Maximilian I died. What's this going to trigger? What do we know about the Holy Roman Empire? What's it mean? We've got a dead emperor, what will there need to be for a new emperor?
Election.
A vote, an election. A new emperor will be chosen. The leading candidate is the grandson of Maximilian I, Habsburg. For a range of reasons, largely due to very cunning marriages, the Habsburg family, who 150 or so years before had been an important but not superstar sort of dynasty in basically what's modern day Austria, Czech Republic, had grown to become far and away Europe's most successful dynastic family. Again, if you have a look at your map for a second here, Charles the First of Spain was the leading candidate. Now, he is the Habsburg inheritor of Spain. Spain's lands, which, at the point we're talking about here, covered all of not only what's marked as Flanders on your map, but all of what is also marked as the United Provinces of the Netherlands. All of basically the Low Countries, modern-day Belgium and Holland, was part of the Habsburg inheritance. As was all the lands that are called the Austrian Habsburg lands on this map. So all of those purple lands over to one side. In short, Charles I, without the emperor, without being emperor, already was the head of vast swathes of European land. Charles I of Spain is already the King of Spain, controls basically all of the Low Countries, and he is the head of the Habsburg lands in sort of Central and Eastern Europe. That's a lot of Europe under the control of one man. If he adds the Holy Roman Empire to that, if he becomes Holy Roman Emperor, basically the entirety of Europe, with the exception of the Italian peninsula and the Kingdom of France, is under the control of one man. And as far as the Church is concerned, that is dangerous. Where will this man's ambitions stop? Does he want to create some kind of pan-European monarchy? Will France be in his sights next. War against Francis I of France, the Habsburg takeover of France. This threatens what the Church sees as its prerogative. It is the only organisation that has a pan-European role. The Catholic Church, based in Rome, Catholics, they worship in England, they worship in France, they worship in Spain, they all owe authority to the Pope. The papacy, the Catholic Church, is the only pan-European player. And Charles V is a threat to this. Charles I, as he is at the moment. Of course, Elector Frederick of Saxony. Saxony is the state in which Wittenberg, where Luther is based. Elector Frederick of Saxony is one of the 7 people with a vote. The Church doesn't want to upset him. It doesn't want to offend him. It doesn't want to basically come in all knob-handed and grab Luther and say, aha! And risk Elector Frederick of Saxony voting against the will of the Church, Charles I's state. So Leo X basically tries to butter up Frederick of Saxony. He sort of sends him a golden rose and says that, hey, you could even be a compromise candidate. How about it? What do you think? You could become Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick, who's known in Germany as Frederick the Wise, was too wise to fall for this trap. He basically said, thank you, but no thank you. I think we ought to have more discussion. More discussion about the future of the empire, more discussion about what Luther wants to do. So 1519.
So did Frederick sympathise with Luther?
Frederick did. Frederick played a conservative game. Frederick was keen to see, as I said, for political and for religious reasons, how this played out. Religiously, he wanted to see, well, if Luther's right, I want to be on the right side of God. I don't want to kind of anger God by making a mistake here. He also really politically, what Luther's suggesting could, for power reasons, have an influence on the German-speaking lands. Another debate is organised.
What does papacy mean?
The papacy is the institution of the Pope, the institution of the head of the Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So they organise another debate, and this time they decide, rather than having it being sort of Kayatan, they get the person that's acknowledged, widely acknowledged in academic circles in the German-speaking lands to be the best debater, the sharpest, most intelligent scholar of his generation, a guy called Johannes Eck. Luther wants to keep kind of a bit of a low profile. He's still not quite sure what role he wants to play. So he sends his sort of head of faculty from his university, a guy called Andreas von Karlstadt, initially, to meet with Eck. Eck wipes the floor with Karlstadt, ties him up in knots, and basically sends him up and crying.
Why doesn't Luther go himself?
So Luther really at this stage, a couple of reasons. One, he's afraid of what might happen to him. And secondly, this is never what he intended. He didn't do this seeking to be at the centre of a great debate involving politics and the like. This for him was an academic discussion that's blown out of proportion. When von Karlstadt comes back and says, I can't do it, you've got to go, Luther basically swallows his kind of fears, swallows his sort of worries, and decides, I have to make a stand. And this leads to, probably apocryphally, his famous statement. Eck basically says, you are doing what Jan Hus did a generation before. Are you aware of that? Jan Hus basically had been a Bohemian guy that spoke out against indulgences, against the abuses of the church. He'd been declared ultimately a heretic and he'd been burned at the stake. This is, Eck drawing a direct parallel. Luther accepts the comparison and says, yeah, for what it's worth, I agree with Hus. Yeah, I think Hus was onto exactly the right thing. Hus said there was no biblical justification for indulgences. Hus said there was no biblical justification for a huge range of practices in the Catholic Church. I stand by him. His famous line supposedly was, here I stand, I can do no other. I stand by what I believe. And what he says is that, look, the realisation I've come to since 1512 as a university lecturer is that it's the Bible that's the authority. The Bible is the best link that we men have to the Word of God. And if it's not in the Bible, we shouldn't be believing it, we shouldn't be following it. So we've already had sola fide, by faith alone, as the core tenet of what Luther's about. Sola scriptura, by scripture alone, joins it. So we've got a Reformation now which is based around, or a Protestant creed based around two things. A protest against the Catholic Church based on scripture and based on the idea of faith. We're nearly there. So what we've got is now, well, Luther had made a stand in 1517, not thinking that he is going to challenge the church, and he's going to break the church in two, and he's going to lead people, a flock, into a new way of worshipping God. No, he wrote it simply thinking that quite possibly a mistake had been made somewhere along the line, and he hoped that that would be able to be corrected. For political reasons, for accidents of death and politics, it had become something vastly bigger. And in trying to crush him, Luther had been given this sort of rigid path to follow. They had presented him with the comparison post. They had said, do you stand by this? And in effect, the church had forced him into a position where, if he wasn't going to back down and say he was sorry, the only outcome that there was going to be was that he was going to challenge them. He was going to say, I disagree with you. You're wrong, I'm right. So the church had really made little rod for its own back with Luther. And for a range of these political reasons, the election of Charles I of Spain as Holy Roman Emperor becomes Charles V, Charles I and the fifth Holy Roman Emperor. Because of Frederick's continued protection for him, because of the way that Luther, now that he's been forced into making this stand, absolutely commits to it. He translates the Bible from Latin into German, and the printing presses go round with that. It's the second runaway success. New Testament first, followed a year later by the Old Testament. He produces pamphlet after pamphlet. It really is, I don't want to patronise you by sort of trying to make it all modern, but it's the equivalent in modern sort of, in early modern terms of, he just basically just becomes someone that sort of blogs all the time. Pamphlet after pamphlet fly from his pen, are printed and fly around Germany and are read. He becomes, you know, the sort of Stephen Fry with however bazillion Twitter followers of his generation. Everyone knows what he thinks. Whatever he writes just goes viral. It's spread across Germany. And the picture that he presents is one of justification by faith alone. It's not all about what they do, it's about having a belief. And secondly, he says, it's justification by the Bible. We shouldn't be told, the Catholic Church does this because it's what we do. You should always be able to say, where's your biblical justification? People.
This goes a little back, sorry, but how, with Charles I, he does become the ruler, but why did they not try and persuade some of the other 7 voters to not vote for him?
They did, and it was a split vote. The 3 main candidates for it turned out to be, and also sort of on the ballot paper, if you like, were Charles I of Spain, Francis I of France. They were the 2 big candidates, and Henry Edward, who was sort of an outside, maybe he would be a good compromise candidate. But in the end, Charles I won pretty handily. He became the Holy Roman Empire. So what happens? Very sort of briefly now to finish off. Well, the church didn't give up, and continued efforts were made to try to basically end this move. But it was really never going to happen. From 1519 onwards, when Luther had been pushed into his position, 1520 when he writes his most famous 1520 pamphlets, 1521, 22, 23 when he translates the Bible, you know, they can't stop it. The horse is bolted. They try militarily to basically remove Protestant princes that said, hey, I'm a Lutheran. Efforts were made to remove them by force. But these princes joined together in what was actually called the Schmalkaldic League to militarily resist these efforts, and they were successful in doing so. By the 1540s, really, it was absolutely apparent that, you know, Lutheranism was here to stay. The Christian church in the German-speaking lands was split. There were Catholics and there were Lutherans. In 1555, there was what's known as the Peace of Augsburg that legally recognised this split, that legally recognised that there was a Reformed church within Germany. The Peace of Augsburg enshrined the doctrine of cuius regio, eius religio, basically, whose realm, his religion. Whatever the religion of the prince, Catholic or Lutheran, his people in that kingdom all have to be that religion. And that set the precedent that lasts basically right through to where this map, date-wise, gives us, which is 1618. We'll start to talk about that soon, because the next big effort to try to crush Protestantism, Lutheranism in Europe, comes with outbreak of what becomes known as the 30 Years' War in 1618. We'll talk about that in subsequent lessons.
The split, is that in the German lands and where is that?
The split really, yeah, the Holy Roman Empire. The split between the Holy Roman Empire within the German-speaking lands. We'll talk about how it starts to ripple outwards from that in our next lesson. Okay, great. Wow, let's see if that